You've heard of queens, but not like this. She was never supposed to wear the crown. An orphan, a captive, a name erased in exile. Yet, somehow, she found herself inside the most powerful palace on earth. No sword, no army, just silence. And a secret too dangerous to speak. What if the fate of an entire people rested on one hidden woman and one forbidden moment? What if her silence could doom a nation, but her voice could alter history? This isn't just a story of royalty, it's a story of reversal, of hidden war, of a woman chosen by heaven to stand when no one else would. Esther. Her name echoes through centuries, but the full weight of her story has been sealed under gold and shadow. Because behind every royal banquet was a conspiracy. Behind every crown, a secret cry for survival. And behind one woman's beauty, a fire that could not be seen but would be felt for generations. To understand what really happened, we must return, not just to Persia, but to a world where kings ruled by decree, where genocide was written into law, and where God, seemingly silent, was weaving destiny through shadows. Imagine it now, a girl draped in royal silk, walking slowly through marble corridors toward a throne she did not ask for. She does not speak, not yet, but in her silence, the heavens are already shifting. Because sometimes the most powerful word is the one you're most afraid to say. And sometimes your greatest trial is actually your divine positioning. If you're drawn to the mysteries buried in Scripture, to voices long silenced, to the unseen fingerprints of God, then you've found the right place. This is the Prophecy Vault. If this already stirs something in you, hit like to let it rise. Subscribe for more stories like this where every moment matters. And share in the comments, have you ever been placed in a moment you didn't understand but couldn't ignore? Are you ready to see the story beneath the story? Let's begin. What happens when a throne is empty and a king is humiliated? The empire of Persia stretched farther than any kingdom before it. From India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces bowed to one man, King Xerxes. He ruled from Susa, a city of golden halls, of marble pillars and silk canopies, where wealth was measured not in coin, but in how long the feasts lasted. For 6 months, Xerxes displayed his power to nobles, governors, and generals. 6 months of wine, 6 months of indulgence, 6 months to show the world that Persia answered to no one but him. And when it ended, he opened the palace gates to everyone, the rich, the poor, the foreigner, and the soldier alike. All were welcomed to a 7-day banquet in the king's own garden. There were no rules, no restraint. The wine flowed like rivers, and the night turned reckless. On the 7th day, as the laughter turned to boasting, Xerxes gave an order. Bring the queen, not for counsel, not for celebration, but for display. He wanted Vashti, crowned and adorned, to parade before drunk men like another jewel in his collection. But Vashti refused. She would not be shown off like property. She would not enter the hall. And with that single act, the empire trembled. The king's pride was pierced in front of princes. His own wife had denied him, and in the world of kings, humiliation is the most dangerous wine. His advisors gathered in whispers. If word spreads of her defiance, wives across the empire will rebel. This cannot be allowed. And so, Queen Vashti was dethroned. A royal edict was written and sent out. Every man should rule his own household, and the crown, once worn in splendor, sat empty. But behind this political drama Something divine was unfolding, because the removal of one queen was making space for another, one hidden, one chosen, for such a time as this. In the months that followed, as the king's anger cooled, his loneliness grew. And again, the advisor spoke. Let the most beautiful virgins of the empire be brought to the palace. They will be given oils, perfumes, and silks. After a year of preparation, the king will choose a new queen. It was a contest on the surface, but heaven had already made its choice. Among the thousands of girls taken from across the empire was a young woman named Hadassah. But here they called her Esther. She was a Jew, an orphan, raised in exile by her cousin Mordecai, who whispered to her from childhood, "Remember who you are, even if no one else does." Esther was not from nobility. She did not arrive with servants or silk. She came quietly. She watched. She listened. And somehow, without asking, she stood out. Not because of her face, but because of her spirit. The keeper of the women, Haggai, found favor with her. He gave her the best quarters, the best oils, the best robes. But Esther did not demand them. She moved gently through the palace, not chasing power, not revealing her heritage. She obeyed Mordecai's words and remained silent. And for 12 long months she waited, perfumed, polished, prepared, until finally her moment came. She entered the king's presence, not like a girl seeking a crown, but like someone who already knew who she was. She bowed low, not out of fear, but out of honor. Xerxes looked up, and in a single breath, the search ended. The king loved Esther, it says in Esther 2, more than all the other women. She won his favor and approval more than any of the virgins. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen. No trumpet, no speech, just the weight of destiny falling quietly onto the head of a once-forgotten girl. But the story doesn't end there, because even as Esther was crowned, no one knew her secret. No one knew that the queen of Persia was a daughter of Israel. No one knew that God had placed her at the very center of power, not for luxury, but for war. Esther was now royalty, but she was also a target, because beneath the banquet halls and the gold-woven curtains, a plan was stirring, a darkness was growing, and Esther, though crowned in silence, would soon be asked to speak. Just like Joseph, who was sold, imprisoned, and forgotten, only to rise beside Pharaoh at the moment of famine. Esther had been placed not for her benefit, but for her people's survival. God hides his servants until the hour of revelation. And now that hour was drawing near. She was chosen, but chosen for what? Stay with us, because the crown she wears will soon become a sword, and silence will no longer be an option. If speaking up could cost your life, would you still do it? The crown sat quietly on her head, but outside the palace walls, a storm had already begun. Haman, the king's new right hand, powerful, proud, ruthless. When he walked through the city gate, every official bowed low, every voice silenced in his presence, every back bent before his name, except one. Mordecai. He stood, tall, still, unafraid. He would not bow, not to pride, not to hate, not even when death stood behind it. Haman burned not just with offense, but with hatred. And when he learned Mordecai was a Jew, his anger deepened into something darker. It wasn't enough to punish one man. He wanted to erase them all. He cast lots, Purim, to choose the day. Then He twisted truth into poison, approaching the king with honeyed lies. "There is a people," he said, "scattered among your provinces. They don't follow your laws. They are different, dangerous. They do not belong." The king listened, trusted. He gave Haman his signet ring, and with it, death was sealed in royal ink. A decree was sent to every province in every language. On the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew, man, woman, and child, was to be killed, legally, publicly, without mercy. The couriers raced across the empire. The city of Susa fell into confusion, and in the streets, mourning began. Mordecai tore his robes, covered himself in sackcloth and ashes. He cried out in the public square, not in rebellion, but in brokenness. And Esther heard of it, not from the king, not from a noble, but through whispers carried by a servant. She sent fresh clothes for Mordecai, a gesture of concern, but not yet understanding. He refused them, and through a messenger, he sent her the truth, the decree, the date, the coming death, and a request. "Go to the king, plead for your people, speak." Esther froze. No one could enter the king's inner court without being summoned, not even the queen. To appear uninvited was to invite death, unless the king extended his golden scepter. And she had not been summoned for 30 days. She answered Mordecai through the messenger, her words trembling. "If I go, and he does not reach out the scepter, I will die." There was silence. Then came the reply, and it shook her to her core. "Do not think that because you are in the palace you will escape. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from elsewhere, but you and your family will perish. And who knows, perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." Those words hung in the air like fire. She turned from the message and walked alone. The palace was quiet, but her soul was loud. That night, there was no banquet, no perfume, no silk, only a girl standing in front of a mirror, face half lit by oil lamp, half lost in shadow. She stared at herself, at the robe, the crown, the weight of it all. And for the first time, Esther was not afraid to feel afraid. She prayed, she remembered, and she chose. She sent word to Mordecai, "Gather all the Jews in Susa, fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. I and my attendants will do the same. And after that, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." The message was sent. The days passed slowly. The city quieted in hunger and prayer. And on the 3rd day, Esther rose. She dressed not as a servant, not as a bride, but as a queen. Every movement deliberate, every breath steady, every step echoing with purpose. She walked through the palace corridors, past curtains of gold, past guards and whispers, toward the chamber no one dared enter. Inside, the king sat on his throne. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. The room stilled. Time froze. The distance between them felt like a lifetime. She said nothing. She didn't move, but she stood tall, resolved. And then the scepter moved. Slowly but surely, he extended it toward her. A breath escaped her lips, not in relief, but in resolve. She stepped forward and touched its tip. She was not destroyed. She was received. Esther had entered not as a pawn, but as a player. Not as a woman in fear, but as a woman in position. Her silence had ended, and the battle had begun. In that moment, she became more than queen. she became a voice for a voiceless people. And centuries later, her words still whisper, "If I perish, I perish, but I will speak." Because sometimes silence kills more than swords ever could. And sometimes standing in the right place means risking everything you have. Just like Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch woman who hid Jews during the Holocaust, not because it was safe, but because it was right. She too knew the risk, but chose the call. And now you, where do you stand when truth costs everything? Would you speak or stay silent? Because the next step Esther takes will not just shift politics, it will shift eternity. The crown has been accepted. The voice is awakened, and the enemy has no idea what's coming. Stay close, because the table is being set, and justice is about to take a seat. Justice delayed is not justice denied. The king sat in silence, his fingers curled around the stem of a golden cup, but his appetite was gone. He looked at Esther. She smiled, softly, graceful, mysterious. The banquet was lavish, the wine rich, the lighting warm. But something was missing, a question unspoken, a petition postponed. Esther had invited both the king and Haman, yet at the end of the evening, she made no request. Instead, she looked the king in the eyes and said, "If it pleases your majesty, come again tomorrow. To another banquet I will prepare, and there I will speak." The king nodded, intrigued. Haman left the feast, his chest swollen with pride. But in the palace that night, the king couldn't sleep. No music eased his restlessness. No wine dulled the tension in his chest. Something stirred in him, a whisper he could not name. So he called for the royal records, the chronicles of his reign. As a scribe read by lamplight, a name appeared, Mordecai, the man who had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king, the man who had saved his life. And yet, no reward had ever been given. The king sat up. "What has been done for this man?" he asked. The servant replied, "Nothing, my lord." Just then, Haman entered the court, hoping to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on a gallows he had built with his own hands. But before he could speak, the king spoke first. "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman smiled to himself. He thought, "Surely this is about me." And so he answered, "Let him wear the royal robe the king has worn. Let him ride the king's horse with a noble official crying out before him, 'This is what is done for the one the king delights to honor.'" The king nodded. "Excellent. Now go quickly. Do everything you have said. For Mordecai the Jew, leave out nothing." Haman's face drained of color. And soon, the very man he hated, he was forced to lead through the streets of Susa, shouting his honor for all to hear. The reversal had begun. That evening, the second banquet was held. The room was solemn, the tension heavier. Esther sat poised. The king looked at her, expectant. "Now, my queen, what is your request? Even half the kingdom, it shall be yours." Esther took a breath. This was the moment. "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, grant me my life. This is my petition, and the lives of my people, this is my request." The king's brows furrowed, his voice sharpened. "What are you saying? Who is he? Who would dare threaten you?" Esther turned slowly, her eyes locked onto Haman. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. She simply said, "The adversary, the enemy, is this wicked man, Haman." The silence exploded. The king rose in fury and stormed into the garden. Haman, pale and trembling, fell at Esther's feet begging for his life. But as he clung to her, the king re-entered and saw him falling across the queen. Will he assault her even in my own house? It was over. Haman was taken and hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The weapon he built became his end, and the silence Esther once feared had become her deliverance. But one problem remained. The decree to destroy the Jews could not be undone, not even by the king. In Persia, a law sealed with the royal ring was final. So Esther came before the king again, this time not for herself, but for her people. How can I bear to see the destruction of my people? How can I watch disaster fall on those I love? The king responded. He gave Mordecai the authority to write a new decree. And so, a second letter was sent across 127 provinces. It read, "The Jews may now assemble. They may defend themselves against any who attack them. They may stand, they may fight, they may live." Hope spread like dawn over the mountains. Mourning gave way to music. And when the day came, when the enemies of Israel rose up, they met a people who would no longer hide. In Susa alone, 800 attackers fell. Across the empire, over 75,000 were defeated. Not out of vengeance, not for conquest, but for survival. Esther asked for one more day of defense in the capital, and the king granted it. The gallows, once built for fear, now stood as a symbol of reversal. And from that moment, a new celebration was born. Purim, named after the lots Haman had cast to choose the day of death. Now, a day of life, of joy, of divine justice. Each year on the 14th and 15th of Adar, the Jewish people remember. They feast, they give gifts, they honor the God who turned mourning into dancing, grief into glory. And Esther, the girl who once stood in silence and fear, now stands in memory as a voice that saved a nation. She spoke when silence was safer. She stepped forward when death was probable. She believed that justice, though delayed, is never denied. Do you believe reversals still happen today? What does deliverance look like in your own life? Maybe it's not a royal court. Maybe it's not a written decree, but maybe you are standing at your own threshold where fear whispers, "Stay silent," and purpose says, "Speak." And maybe, just maybe, you were placed right where you are for such a time as this. Because the story of Esther isn't just history, it's prophecy in motion, and her courage still echoes in every generation that dares to rise. Let this be the moment you remember it. And as the firelight fades, as the curtain of this story draws close, know this: we are not done. There's still more to uncover, more mysteries to unseal. Stay close to the prophecy vault, because this story was only the beginning. The story of Esther is more than a memory. It's more than a crown, a banquet, or a royal decree. It's a divine pattern, etched into the quiet places of time, echoing through every generation that finds itself caught between silence and purpose. Because even when God feels silent, He is never absent. Even when the odds are against you and the enemy seems louder than truth, He is working behind curtains you cannot yet see. Esther didn't seek the crown, she didn't chase her moment. But when the moment came, she didn't run. She stood with trembling hands and a steady heart. She stood. And when she spoke, history shifted. A people were saved, and silence became salvation. Maybe your moment looks different. Maybe there's no throne, no royal robe, just a decision you keep putting off. A conversation, a stand, a calling. Maybe you too were placed where you are for such a time as this. Not because you feel ready, not because you're strong, but because your voice was meant for this moment. So, what will you do when the moment comes? Will you hide behind comfort or step into your calling? Will you be silent or will you speak? This isn't just Esther's story. It's a whisper in your soul. A reminder that the world changes when ordinary people say yes to extraordinary moments. If this story stirred something in you, like this video, let us know in the comments. What is your such a time as this? And if you want more stories like this, stories that awaken faith, purpose, and hidden strength, subscribe to the Prophecy Vault. This is only the beginning. Because the God who reversed death into life, mourning into joy, and silence into deliverance, still writes stories. And yours could be next. Fade to black for such a time as this. Soft music rises, screen fades,